All right, let's get into these slides on skepticism and sources of knowledge.
Yeah.
It seems like we're going to be exploring how skepticism can help us better understand the world.
Yeah, well, what's really cool about skepticism is it kind of pushes us to question
Right.
things we just kind of assume or believe.
Yeah.
It helps us to examine what we think is true more deeply.
So it's less about like
Yeah,
being cynical and more about being thoughtful and discerning
absolutely
about
right.
the information that's coming at us.
And these slides really highlight that skepticism is something we can actually use.
Mm-hmm.
It's not some abstract
Yeah.
philosophical concept.
Okay.
It helps us deal with like information overload and figure out
Right.
if different sources are reliable.
So in the slides, we've got sources of knowledge,
Hmm.
perception, reason, memory, testimony.
Yeah.
It seems like each of these has strengths and weaknesses.
Oh, absolutely.
course.
Our senses can be tricked super easily.
Yeah.
For, optical illusions.
Yeah.
Those show us how perception
Right.
can be different from reality.
So our senses give us info, but they
Yeah.
don't always give us the whole picture.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about reason?
Okay.
How does that play into our understanding of knowledge?
Reason lets us go past just our immediate senses.
Mm.
It helps us make logical connections, draw inferences, come up with arguments.
Right.
It helps us break down info and make conclusions.
But isn't reason kind of subjective too?
Oh, yeah, that's a great point.
Like two people can look at the same evidence and
Absolutely.
come to totally different conclusions.
You've hit it right on the head.
Yeah.
Reason is influenced by our own biases, experiences,
Right.
and what information we choose to consider.
So then how do we know?
Yeah, that's why it's so important to recognize our own biases
Okay.
and be open to other points of view.
This makes me think about memory.
Uh-huh.
The slides mention it as a source of knowledge,
Yeah.
but isn't memory like notoriously unreliable?
Yeah, memory changes all the time.
Yeah.
It's shaped by our emotions, beliefs, even how we remember things.
It's not like a perfect recording.
Right. It's more like a story that changes.
So even our own memories can be questioned.
Yeah.
That highlights how important it is to back up evidence and not just rely on what we remember.
You got it.
Now, what about testimony?
Okay, so testimony is basically relying on what other people know and have experienced.
Right.
That's how we learn a lot about the world,
Yeah.
through experts, books, podcasts even.
Exactly.
But we have to be careful with this too.
Right.
We can't just believe everything we hear or read.
We have to consider the source,
Yeah.
their potential biases,
Yes.
and whether their claims match up with other evidence.
So skepticism helps us look at testimony with a critical eye.
Uh-huh.
It makes us question assumptions, look for other evidence,
Yeah.
and be wary of things that sound too good to be true.
It's so interesting how skepticism applies to all these different sources.
Yeah, it's
Like
like,
a common thread.
yeah, it's a common thread.
That reminds us to be thoughtful and careful in our search for understanding.
It's not about just rejecting everything outright.
Okay.
It's about having a healthy sense of curiosity and thinking critically.
So
It makes us ask,
yeah.
what evidence is there for this claim?
Mm-hmm.
Are there other explanations?
I see.
Is this source credible?
These questions seem super important
Yeah.
for dealing with the huge amount of information we get every day.
Right.
But if we're always questioning and evaluating,
Mm-hmm.
can we ever really be sure of anything?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And philosophers have debated that for centuries.
Yeah.
The idea of absolute certainty is a complex one.
It sounds like skepticism challenges the whole idea that we can have
Yeah.
complete, unshakable knowledge.
Right.
But does that mean we're stuck in a world of constant doubt?
Not at all. Skepticism kind of helps us see that we don't know everything
Okay.
and to be okay with maybe being wrong.
Right.
It's about being okay with some uncertainty and realizing
Uh-huh.
that how we see the world is always changing.
So it's more about the journey of learning
Yeah.
than holding on to beliefs that can't change.
Exactly.
So it sounds like skepticism helps us stay mentally flexible
It definitely does.
and open to new ideas.
It helps us not get stuck in our ways or closed off instead of always needing to be right.
Okay.
We're always improving what we understand by questioning,
Yeah.
gathering evidence, and looking at things critically.
It's not about breaking down knowledge.
Right.
It's more like building a stronger base for it.
Exactly.
Like we're always testing to make sure our beliefs are strong.
Yeah.
The slides also talk about how important skepticism is for making good decisions.
It's super important.
In a world with so many choices,
Yeah.
how can skepticism help us decide what to do?
When you're facing a choice, especially a big one,
Okay.
skepticism tells us to get evidence from different places. See if those sources are reliable, and think about biases or other ways to explain things.
It's like researching before making a big purchase or choosing a doctor.
Exactly.
We wouldn't want to make those decisions based on bad information.
Right. Skepticism makes us ask,
Okay.
what are the good and bad things that could happen?
Yeah.
What evidence backs up each option? Are there hidden agendas?
Right.
By thinking carefully about these things,
Okay.
we make smarter choices that match our values and goals.
It sounds like skepticism helps us deal with how complicated life is when we're hit with all these messages and info.
It's like having a filter for our brain.
Okay.
The more complicated the world gets,
Right.
the more we need skepticism.
Yeah.
It helps us be smart about what we believe, to think critically,
Right.
and to be responsible citizens.
But is there a point where we can be too skeptical?
That's a good question.
Could it lead to overthinking and not being able to decide anything?
Yeah, it can.
Where's the line between healthy skepticism and just doubting everything?
If you take it too far,
Yeah.
skepticism can make you freeze up.
Okay.
The trick is to balance being open-minded
Right.
and thinking critically.
So be skeptical, but not cynical.
Exactly.
Question things.
Right.
But don't reject everything outright.
It's about finding that sweet spot
Okay.
where critical thinking helps you understand better
Right.
without stopping you from making choices.
It's about being humble about what we know.
Absolutely.
Recognizing we don't know everything.
Yeah.
And being open to learning from others.
And that brings us back to what the slide said about intellectual humility.
Right.
How does that connect to skepticism?
Just how does that connect?
Intellectual humility means knowing we don't have all the answers and that what we understand is always changing.
Okay.
It's about admitting when we're wrong
Right.
and changing our minds when we see strong evidence.
It's like saying, I don't know everything, but I want to learn.
Exactly.
That kind of open-mindedness seems really important.
It is.
For personal growth and exploring new ideas.
If we don't have intellectual humility,
Okay.
we can get stuck in echo chambers,
Right.
only hearing things that agree with us. Skepticism and intellectual humility help us break out of that and consider different points of view.
So skepticism is about more than just questioning information. It's about a mindset of curiosity, humility, and a willingness to be challenged.
Absolutely.
It's about recognizing that learning is ongoing and there's always something new to discover.
You've got it.
You really captured it.
This deep dive has shown us how important skepticism is in our lives.
Yeah.
It helps us be smarter about information, think more critically,
Right.
and ultimately make better choices.
It's like we're getting these mental tools that let us
So.
navigate the world
Yeah.
with more confidence and clarity.
And speaking of tools,
Yeah.
the slides emphasize how important skepticism is for evaluating claims and arguments.
When we look at claims,
Okay.
skepticism makes us look for evidence. Check the source's credibility
Right.
and see if there are biases or logical fallacies.
So we're not just absorbing information.
No, we're not.
We're thinking about it critically
Yes.
and deciding if it's reliable.
Are there specific things we can do to get better at skepticism?
I was just thinking that.
One important thing is always looking at the source.
Okay.
Who's making the claim? What are their qualifications and biases?
We'd probably trust a doctor about medical stuff
Yeah.
more than some random person online.
Right.
Looking at their expertise and potential biases
Exactly.
helps us figure out if their claims are valid.
Another thing is to look for evidence.
Yeah, what kind of data or research supports it?
Right. Is the evidence reliable and credible?
Uh-huh.
Has it been peer-reviewed or checked by others?
It's like we're detectives looking for clues to prove or disprove the claim.
Exactly. We want solid evidence. Right. Not just someone saying something without backing it up.
And remember, big claims need big evidence.
No.
If something goes against what we already know from science or history,
Yeah.
skepticism helps us not get fooled by misinformation or emotional stuff.
Okay, so another important technique is being aware of logical fallacies.
Yeah.
These are like common mistakes in reasoning
Exactly.
that can make an argument sound good even if it's not.
Right.
Can you give us an example?
Sure, one common fallacy is the ad hominem attack.
What's that?
That's when someone attacks the person making the argument instead of the argument itself.
So like if you disagree with an economist's analysis of a policy just because you don't like their political views,
exactly,
that's avoiding the real issue.
It is.
Right.
Another common one is the appeal to popularity.
Okay.
That's when someone says something must be true just because lots of people believe it.
Right. But just because something's popular doesn't make it true.
It's like saying everyone thinks the earth is flat, so it must be true.
Yeah, we know that's not right.
Exactly. Recognizing these logical fallacies helps us not be swayed by bad reasoning and to focus on the argument's actual strength.
So by learning about these fallacies and using these skeptical techniques, we become better at understanding information.
Absolutely.
And making good choices.
It's like we're getting a toolkit for our brains.
Yeah.
This deep dive has really shown how powerful skepticism is in every part of our lives.
It's not about being negative. It's about thinking carefully and wanting to learn.
Absolutely.
It can help us in everything we do.
Yeah, whether we're reading news, making personal choices, or just talking to people.
So to sum it up, this deep dive has shown us that skepticism is about being thoughtful, careful, and intellectually active.
It's a mindset that can make our lives better.
And maybe the most important thing we can learn from skepticism is that accepting uncertainty isn't a bad thing.
You're right.
It's actually a strength.
Yeah, being okay with not knowing everything lets us be open to new things, new experiences, and new ways of seeing things.
It's about admitting we don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
And that there's always more to learn. It's like approaching the world with wonder and curiosity.
I like that.
Instead of being stuck in our old ways of thinking.
Skepticism helps us explore and discover new things.
And with intellectual humility, we can keep learning throughout our lives.
It keeps us curious and able to adapt.
Yeah, in a world that never stops changing.
Exactly.
It seems like these slides want us to be involved in how knowledge is made.
That's right.
We're not just taking in information passively.
We're
thinking about it critically, questioning it, and trying to understand it more deeply.
It's about being mindful of how we take in information.
Okay.
Instead of just accepting everything we see, we're engaging with it, asking questions, and coming to our own conclusions.
This deep dive has been really insightful.
It has.
It's made me see that skepticism isn't about being cynical or dismissive.
Right.
It's about being thoughtful, discerning, and intellectually engaged.
It's a way of thinking that can help us in every part of our lives.
Yeah. Whether we're looking at news stories, making decisions, or talking with friends and family.
Skepticism can help us understand the world better. With more clarity and confidence.
So to wrap up our deep dive into skepticism and sources of knowledge, let's leave our listeners with this thought.
Okay.
If we can't ever be absolutely certain about anything, how does that change the way you approach learning and making decisions?
Right.
Does it make you more careful, more open-minded, or maybe a bit of both? Yeah, it really is fascinating to think that not being sure can actually be a good thing.
Right.
It seems kind of backwards, but it makes sense when you think about how learning happens when we push past what we think we know.
Absolutely. Being okay with uncertainty helps us be open to new information, new experiences, new perspectives even.
It's like we're saying, okay, I don't have all the answers, and there's more out there to discover.
Exactly.
It's like looking at the world with a sense of curiosity.
I like that.
And wonder, instead of clinging to those rigid beliefs.
Skepticism becomes a tool for exploring and finding new things.
Yeah, and when we combine that with intellectual humility, it lets us keep learning our whole lives.
It keeps us engaged and curious and able to adapt.
Right, in a world that's always changing.
It seems like these slides are telling us to be more than just listeners.
Yeah.
They want us to be part of how knowledge is created.
Right, we're not just passively taking in whatever we hear.
We're actively engaging with it.
We're questioning things and really trying to understand them on a deeper level.
It's about being more aware of how we consume information.
So instead of just blindly accepting everything we see and hear,
we're thinking critically.
Yeah.
We're asking questions.
Right, and we're coming to our own conclusions.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive.
I think so too.
It's made me realize that skepticism isn't about being cynical
or dismissive.
It's about thinking things through.
Yeah.
being discerning and intellectually engaged.
And it's something that can help us in every part of our lives.
Whether we're evaluating news stories,
Making personal decisions,
or even just chatting with friends and family.
Skepticism gives us the tools to navigate the world
With more clarity and confidence.
So as we wrap up our exploration of skepticism and sources of knowledge,
Okay.
let's leave our listeners with one final thought.
Right.
If we can't ever be completely certain about anything,
Yeah.
how does that change how you approach learning and making choices?
It's a great question to consider.
Does it make you more cautious or more open-minded?
Maybe a little of both.
That's something for everyone to think about.
I think this deep dive has given us all a lot to consider.
It definitely has.
Skepticism is a powerful tool for navigating the world.
Absolutely. And it's something we can all benefit from.
So go out there and embrace a little healthy skepticism.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It was a pleasure.